All right, so those of you who hadn't seen the movie before, did you enjoy? It's pretty special, right? Okay, so this movie inspired the conversation that you're going to hear now. I'm going to read you the bio of our moderator so that I can credentialize her properly. She's the first person I thought of to be a part of this. Monica Castillo is going to lead us in a conversation, the future of Latinx stories in Hollywood. She's an associate curator at the Paley Center for Media. Her work has appeared in NPR, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Colorado Public Radio, NBC News, Roger Ebert, The Wrap, pretty much every publication that writes about this issue. She's also served as the Region 2 Director of the New York City chapter of the President of for the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Please welcome Monica Castillo.
Okay. Yes, if they're here, I can also just call one by one. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. I'll call names and then they can join me on stage. Oh, wonderful. Hi. Hi. Say hi to the folks at home. Well, thank you for those of you who braved the amazing weather outside today to join us. I'm excited to welcome Cynthia Lopez, Executive Director of the New York Women in Film and Television. Oh, yes. In her previous work, she was an award-winning media strategist and former commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. She's won 12 Emmys, 3 Peabodys, and the list goes on and on. Thank you for joining me. Up next is Yara Travieso. Did I say that right? Travieso, Yara Travieso. Yara is an award-winning artist whose work has been shown at numerous cultural institutions here in New York City and abroad. In addition to creating new narratives, Yara is also leading film and performance courses at Juilliard. And next is Calixto Chinchilla. Calixto has been at the forefront of the discussion of Latinx representation since partnering with HBO in 1999 to create the New York Latino Film Festival. Since then, the festival has attracted more than 200,000 participants. And then next is Laura Zornosa. Laura or Laura? Either one works. That's like me, Monica. Laura Zornosa is currently the New York Times Arts Fellow on the Culture Desk. She is a great piece on Encanto that I recommend everyone check out after this panel. Let's have one more round of applause for all the folks here on stage. I want to start with a movie that everyone just saw. Hopefully you got the chance to rewatch or revisit recently. I want to hear more about the first time you saw this movie. What was your first impression when you saw that? And what parts of the story resonated with you? I can start with Cynthia.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here and in support of the Athena Film Festival. I have to say thank you, Melissa, and all the people behind the scenes in making this happen. This is my first public event in 3 years. So thank you all for being here. And I think it's part of why I said yes. I said to Melissa, you asked me, so of course I said yes, but then the topic of Latinas and Latinos in media is so dear to my heart that it was important for us to be here. The first time I saw this film, to answer your question, was at the Sundance Film Festival 20 years ago. I used to be an executive at PBS for many years. I was a co-executive producer of something called POV. It's a series on PBS. And I remember it was the evening screening at 12 midnight. And I said to myself, and it was at the public library at Sundance. And I said, no one will be there. You know, it's 12 o'clock at night. You know, the writer is not someone who's very well known. And I remember I got the last seat of sort of 1,000-person theater. You know, it was like 1,000 seats.
Yeah, that's one
that
of
were
their like bigger venues.
Bigger venues,
Yeah.
and the seats were a little like this, but
even
crammed
closer.
in- exactly, crammed in together. And I come sort of tumbling in, and I was like, look at the amount of people that came out to see this movie. It still gives me the chills. And I had been to Sundance several years before that, and I used to say, you know, there's a lot of boy films that go to Sundance, that get accepted to Sundance. And that used to bother me. And so to see this film where the central character was not the traditional character that we thought of was fabulous to me. And I would just say my favorite scene, I had parents who really, really believed in education and supported my trajectory. So it's no wonder that I've done pretty well in my life. But so I didn't have a mom like Lupe at all. However, I did have a dad who was obsessed with beauty. So when Lupe says, don't eat the flan, that was my father speaking. You know, with him, you know, when my brother and I were ever anywhere, he was always like, are you going to eat that? And we were like, yes, we are. So I have to say that was one of the parts of the movie that I love the best, that it's so honest, that sometimes while I think in Latin culture, we think that we're all the same or very similar, I think we're very different. We are not always very similar. And that's what I love that this movie celebrates, our diversity within our culture.
Awesome. Yara?
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm so happy to be invited to be on the panel. Amazing group of people. Yeah, so the first time I watched this movie, I was in high school, and we had cable that my dad knew a guy, so we sometimes had cable. It just depended if he could hook it up that week. And I don't remember what like station this ended up coming on after it premiered, but I remember it was like there was a time it was like always on TV.
I think it was on HBO.
HBO. That was one of the channels that we got somehow. And so I remember it was like always on loop. And this is my second time watching it since I watched it like a bunch in high school. And it's funny because at home, we had a Spanish speaking home. I didn't really speak English until, it took me a really long time to actually speak English well. And so this was one of those movies that we had on TV. It was like one of the movies that we watched all the time in the background when, the news is on one room and then that movie's on the other room. And I remember thinking, this is something I remembered thinking, and I wanted to watch it again here today to see how I felt about it. But thinking, I wish that my mom was more like Anna, like the young girl, more than me like her, because I felt like I was like her. I was such, in her eyes, such a difficult daughter, but I just wanted my mom to be more like Anna. And I just remember that feeling. And watching now, I got really emotional. Actually, I got really choked up because that scene when she leaves and she goes to college and her mom wouldn't speak to her. I still have those experiences when I show my work, when I show my films to my mom. And it's really difficult, that tension. And I think that now thinking of it is in this like new chapter where we are as storytellers and Latina filmmakers, a lot of the work feels now like the healing of a lot of those wounds, where I feel like this was an introduction of the wound, and I feel really excited about this next chapter of the healing of that wound and not sort of continuing these cycles. But I also feel watching it, the obsession with our bodies too, because obviously I was a flaquita, like growing up. I used to be a professional dancer, and a lot of my life revolved around body. But then at home, my nickname, there was a lot of tension with my mom and my body, and my nickname for my mom was Mowgli from the Jungle Book, or like Peter Pan, or Saco Hueso, which means sack of bones. And so there was a lot of tension around body, and like always like touching body and commenting on body, and and there was always like this. And then my sister looked more like America Ferrera, so there was always like, está muy gordita, she's too chubby, and she's too skinny. So there was always like this comparison of bodies and from the men in the family as well. So there was always this tension. And then I ended up dancing at Juilliard, and then it was like more of that, but from a very different point of view. And so everybody, when I was at Juilliard, had an eating disorder as a way to cope. And, you know, this narrative continued on. And I think being able to come back home still and have these conversations with my mom, it's very clear that there's so much, like the, oh my God, Lupe, the Carmen, who played by Lupe, who's just such a brilliant, oh, she's so good in everything she's ever done. I need to just go watch all of the films she's ever been in,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I was just like, I forgot how genius you are. But it's that I think the reason why, going back to I wish my mom was more like Anna, is that I could feel this sort of self-loathing, and I could sense it, and I could sense this hatred for her ability to be in the world fully, to exist, to expand in the world, to speak her mind. And I wanted her so badly to be able to do that, you know? And I wanted her so badly to teach me about the world. And I think that this is such an interesting dynamic. This film introduces so many things, but I actually read the play, and the play brings up even more themes on immigration and so many other topics. And I work in theater and in film, so it's really actually nice. I recommend reading the play because the play has like even more density. But this is such a great way into the story.
Josefina's a great woman.
Yeah, Josefina Lopez, for
Wrote-
for folks who want to look her work up. She has quite a lot of plays,
Yeah.
not just this one.
I think she's like well over close to 100 or something. She writes, she turns them out.
Yeah.
She wrote this one when she was like, what, 19 or something?
Wow, I
This
didn't know.
play,
I didn't know
yeah.
the age when she
It's
wrote it.
crazy.
Yeah.
I remember meeting her when it came out and all of that. I mean, two words when I see this film: Lupe Otaveros and America Ferrera.
Yes.
Like America for a debut performance like this, to be so vulnerable, revealing, everything is a first for her on camera. That's a lot for a young woman, and I think people, at least for me, I'm reminded of that when I saw this, when I see it right now, and I totally forgot that Columbia University was the college that she got chosen to attend, but even though I'm a guy, but I want to say the thing that really related to me was Lupe's character, because my mother was her to me. Like, I grew up in the projects. My mother had a ninja grip on me. She didn't want me to go away to college. We fought over it. She sabotaged my interview. She did all of that. So I totally related to that, because I felt it. I know Latino mothers like that, and they're well intended. But it caused a frictional relationship at that time, because I found like I could have totally identify with her, because I wanted to break out. I'm a grown man, you know what I mean? And it wasn't like that. And so there was that. I remember the time, like, Cynthia, you expressed like, it being packed, but yeah, it was packed for a reason, because it was the only Latino film at Sundance. You know what I mean? And so that's the sad thing, is that to this day, 20 years later, you can count the number of Latino films that are at Sundance. And so that's a problem. The unfortunate thing is that 20 years later, we're still having the same conversation, right? And yet, the film came out at that interesting period, where you had Girl Fight that came out like the year before. Yep. You had this film that came out right after. But let's not forget, just 5 years prior to this release, you had I Like It Like That, which is the first film directed by a Black woman on a studio film. That's crazy. You know what I mean? So all of this is still raw and real, and, outside of just the films, but just the politics, the culture politics, the Hollywood politics, that stuff is still real. And we're still having the same conversation 20 years later.
Oh yeah, we're gonna jump on that in a minute, but I want to hear real quick from Laura about your experiences first watching this film, and what about it resonated with you.
I will say, I'll expose myself. I was fully 4 when this film came out. So I first experienced this as an adult. I don't think I experienced it, in the same way that it was formative for a lot of you guys, because I had a different relationship with it. And for me, my very first impression was like, oh my God, Latinos exist in community, and they exist, like, period, because I'm from Wisconsin. And my dad is Colombian and my mom is not. And we were like the only Colombian family I knew in the entire state. The only Latinos really in my town. There were like a few other Mexican families we played soccer with, and that was it. So being able to just see like Latin life portrayed on screen and realize like, wow, this exists beyond literally like dairy farms, essentially. Like it just, I don't know, it made me realize that communities out there and like my people are out there. Obviously now I'm in New York, it's a very different thing. But even like my mom is from Chicago. And so we have we have like a Mexican neighborhood and we have Puerto Rican neighborhood, but like to see like you said, like diversity on screen and like LA as not as a white city, which it's not, but I think it's perceived that way, especially by the film industry, was exciting. I thought it was really prescient and like very ahead of its time in terms of gender roles, but also class. Like I was very pleasantly surprised to see that the white collar roles were like also played by Latinos. And we had that conversation like between class was present too. I was like really worried that this teacher was going to be a white guy and that the person in charge of the contract was going to be a white woman. But like, no, we had these very nuanced conversations about class and race, which for 2002, like that's a lot, I felt like. And at the same time, like seeing basically the filmmakers combating machismo in real time, like obviously the mom has internalized a lot of that and patriarchal gaze, male gaze, but to see a supportive father figure and patriarch was just really exciting in a way. Like I know this movie is a milestone of representation, period. Like the fact that we see these faces on screen and behind the line, above the line. But then on top of that, to be talking about class and gender in like a really nuanced way was so exciting and like makes me excited for what we can do 20 years later if we are given the chance.
And that is a really big if, because this was so remarkable 20 years ago, directed by Patricia Cardosa and based on a play by Josefina Lopez, both Latinas, but we're still hungry to see ourselves on screen. We're almost 20% of the population and about 6 to 7% of speaking roles on screen. We're almost 1 out of 5 Americans, and yet of the few on-screen roles that we do have, about a third of those depict us as criminals. So I want to hear from the panel, maybe some of the reasons why these challenges facing our community still exist in Hollywood. What is keeping us from achieving that parity? Because there are many reasons. So let's dig in. Here, you know what? Let's start with Calixto.
Oh
Yeah.
no, I didn't mean to
Oh yeah. Does it seem like you?
I mean, this is a dinner.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all that.
Okay, let's do the appetizer version.
All right.
One idea apiece.
I mean, I think it's having a seat at the table. There's not many of us that have a seat at the table. There's not. I can name you the Latino executives right now that can pull the trigger and get your film greenlit at a studio. None. That's a problem. You know what I mean? And so I think it starts from there. I don't know why, we're not in those C-suite kind of executive positions. I don't know if it's interest or whatever, but, I think that's one reason. There's money, for me in my world, all of us here, this game is a marathon. And as much as we're still having the conversation now, there is a ray of hope. You know what I mean? You're seeing the change, you're seeing systemic change. Hey, African Americans are seeing that right now, right? And Latinos are Black too, right? And so we're seeing it in bits and pieces. And so for me, that's encouraging. You're seeing it with changes in the newsroom. Like I can name the Latinos that are at Deadline or at Variety that are telling our stories, like from a journalistic level, right? And then, you're having leaders like Cynthia, she's running, Women Make Movies, New York Women in Film and Television, excuse me. New York Women in Film and Television. And, so you're seeing all of us here. So I think, again, it's making those movements. And I think we're finding ourselves trying to make cracks where we can. You have, when this movie came out, not too long ago, you had the rise of NALIP, the Latino National Association of Latino Independent Producers, and that came out of frustration, right? And then you had the film festival that came out of frustration in the same way. So I think what Hollywood doesn't do for us, we're trying to find ways and cracks to get in for ourselves and kind of create the change. I think when it comes to TV, I think it's the same thing. The problem that we're having on television, yeah, we're getting a break. You're getting Promised Land, you're getting Baker and the Beauty and all the other things, but all those shows have been canceled. And I think that the other thing is that we're not getting the runway for these shows to really succeed, because you have the talent. Obviously, there's Latino writers in the room, but you look at even Gentefied. Like, what happened to Gentefied? And if anybody who could have given that show a fair shot is Netflix. And it just didn't happen. But is that going to stop us? Hell no. I mean, you still have all those writers, the creators already working for the next thing. And you just have to keep at it and keep at it. And, for us, it's all of us here to be strong and keep finding the cracks and getting in and building up that influence.
Yada, I'm curious for you as someone who creates those narratives and those films and projects, what are some of the blocks that you found in your career?
Latinas are of the smallest percentage of storytellers historically in this country, but even today we are the smallest pool at the table. I don't want a seat at the table, personally. I'm in the kitchen cooking. You can come to my kitchen anytime. I'm not interested in the table. I used to be. I founded a film festival back in the day called Borscht Film Festival. I was the only woman also there, and I quickly started to understand a dynamic in film spaces, in theater spaces, in every spaces I was in, where my story was being manipulated by a bigger system. And I was being pushed to talk about my trauma as a woman, my trauma as immigrant narratives, and the American dream. My stories are not about the American dream. They're not. My stories live in a very different space that I inherited through my grandmother, her mother, and her mother, and my mother. And they're the whispers. They're these other parts of the story. And my works and my stories and my scripts don't line up with the story of the Latina in America. And so there is a conflict there. So I could either use my talents to mold my story into what is wanted, or I can create a different space. So that's what I've been doing. I've created a space for myself. I've started to write, direct these wild live films. So basically, I would use my resources in theater. I was finding more support in my experimental space, and a lot of support to be an experimental artist that was making films in an experimental realm. But the product is very much open and accessible to so many communities. It's bilingual. That's the other thing. Anytime a big production company or a big producer approaches me, I say, yeah, I want to do this. I've been writing the script. It's all in Spanish. Oh, we won't get the awards. Oh, I don't want the awards. Like, this is the story. I can't have them in accents. That's so weird. That's not how we talk.
It's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. And also, it's just, maybe that's not my audience. Maybe I'm not writing it for the people that want to read it in subtitles, and the people that understand the language. So, there's all these ladders that I'm not interested in climbing. And it does free up my voice. It means that I'm not necessarily like living in a fancy mansion or any of those things, or even have like consistent stability in any way. But it does feel incredibly wonderful to really work from the inside out, not the outside in. And that's something I've been able to do through the years, and just stay true to that, and really stay true to like a clear voice that I feel inside as a creator. And it does go against also what my parents want for me and all these things. And that's why my mom will walk out in the middle of a screening. But I do think that these stories are really beautiful. It also goes into a lot of non-binary narratives and queer narratives that I am really, really excited to tell as a Latina in the queer space, and what's happening right now in Latin America too. It's really beautiful in those spaces that, there's all this tension, but there's also all of this beauty being born that I would love to be able to talk about. So anyways, all that to say is that it is difficult. We are of the smallest pool, but I'm not interested to have a seat at the table. There is a lot of beautiful stories being told. There's so many experimental spaces and theaters and art houses that are really supporting a lot of these stories, and I really encourage everyone to seek them out. I also am happy to share after this.
Yeah, definitely seek Yara out for those recommendations. Cynthia, I'm curious from your perspective as the head of this major organization that helps a lot of women either get the grants or network, all the different resources that you offer. What are the stories that you've heard from creators that they're having to deal with, that they're not able to get their projects off the ground?
Sure. I think what's interesting to me, having done this work for many years, is that I always think about investment, right? And so one of the things I was looking at earlier today when I was prepping for this panel was just thinking about philanthropic dollars, right? So there's 1.6% of all of the philanthropic dollars that are raised in America are dedicated to women's causes in general. Okay, 1.6% of all of the philanthropic dollars that are given out, the billions and billions of dollars that are given out a year, 1.6% of that is given to women's causes. And usually that means violence against women, that means hunger, that means homelessness. The artist portion of that 1.6 is less than 0.01%. Okay, so we should really think about that when we think about investment. And when I think about the people on this panel, which I'm so proud to be part of, Calixto and I know each other for many, many years. I've seen what he has grown over many years in terms of dedication to content. And so I think first, investment. There hasn't been the proper investment in Latina artists in the way that there should be, but that is true the case for women artists in general as well. I was looking up, my goddaughter was helping me look up who are the most famous writers in America right now, and which of them are Latina writers, right? And so up comes, a list of 17 names, and some of which were not Latina. Right? And we were like, oh my God, this is insane. If somebody had to do, a paper in high school, they wouldn't even get the right information. And this is why we cannot always rely on the internet for proper information. But I think one, it's investment. Two, it's when we look at the festivals, all the major festivals, Tribeca, Sundance, Toronto, etc. And I know I've been judges at all of those festivals. We need to push harder to ensure that the Latina projects that get submitted to those festivals gets a fair shake at actually entering the marketplace. That's number two. Number three, it goes back to what Calixto is saying. When we think about green lighters at studios, television stations, as well as foundations, who are the women in positions of power that can open the door? For some people who know me, when I was commissioner here in New York City, I always used to say, our job as women in the media and women in the movement, if you will, people like Melissa, people like the people on the stage, we have to be willing not only to get through the door, but to hold the door open for those who come behind us. And that not be sort of an ego situation, if you will, but that, I always say all of the work that I do, it's to make sure that there's a crew of women that won't have to work as hard as I did. Right? And I understand too that, we understand there is racism in America. We do understand that, right? My brother always used to say to me, you have to understand the luck that you've had as well to succeed in this business, because years ago, it was very, very hard to get any project, foundation money for it, etc. So I think now, we're very conscious, but when I look at the television dial and I'm looking for Latino content, the irony is right now I'm watching a telenovela that's called Ercay, and it was done in Turkey and then subtitled in Spanish.
Yep.
And there's a lot of cultural nuances that are similar to Turkish and Latino culture, but I'm not looking for one size fits all type media. I'm also not looking for that the heroine has to be from either the upper class or the underclass. I want somebody that can be the hero no matter what, you know what I mean? And fight the good fight for the people. You know, you don't always see that. Even when I look at the Marvel series and stuff like that, that I go like, where are the Latinos in those kind of series, right? I want to see, you know, a Latina ninja. When I was commissioner, you know, I used to meet with these studio executives and they say, what do you want? And I said, a Puerto Rican ninja. And they would start laughing. And I was like, that's not funny. You know what I mean? I want characters that
I'll
have
introduce you to my mom. That's just-
what? What? I know when you said your mom was a ninja, or she had a ninja hold on you, I was like, well, but all to say that there has to be a multiplicity of approaches. There's not a one size, like you do this and you're going to get more Latino content. It has to also be, we need to support when we think of the writer of this, she's the one that's in the fast food scene. She's the writer, right? So for myself, it's like we need to invest at various levels, and we also have to take risks. You know, I used to go into a room pitching a certain film, and people would say, Cynthia, why should I invest in this? And I would give them all the reasons on why they should invest, but more so I would say, you need to take the risk with me, because art is about risk. You know, there's no guarantee that this piece is going to bring you a return on investment. And we need to understand that. So I don't have the one answer other than we need people in positions of power who are making the decisions try to open the door some more to opportunity. And we need the grassroots movement to continue fighting the fight.
Oh yeah, there is never going to be one answer. It's a many faceted problem. Lauda, I'm curious from your perspective as someone now covering it on the journalistic side, what have you noticed in the business and, you know, maybe some of the movies that you've covered?
Yeah, I will say even recently, I've heard Latino and Latina critics mention that they think there's not enough out there, that this is like a content problem and like things aren't going to get made if they don't exist. And I think that I was shocked to hear that. I'm surprised that that's still a conversation being had. I just think that there's absolutely so much beautiful content out there right now. Like it is literally, I'm imagining a door and on one side just water like flooded all the way to the ceiling, and we just need someone to open it and like let it out basically. There's a whole ecosystem. I used to write for the LA Times, and in LA, I mean, you have endless, like there's like Latinas who brunch. She's a Gloria Calderon Kellett group. There's La Lista, which is like literally they're La Lista and Latinx directors are both databases online that any studio exec could go and find. And like, these are catalogs of directors broken down by sometimes nationality, sexual orientation, like specific, what type of stories do they tell? Like they have these categories where if you want to tell a Guatemalan story that's queer and involves Afro-Latinas, like that's out there. And it's literally made available to C-level executives. And we just need them to pay attention. Like all they have to do is take a look. I think the onus is on them. It's on basically executives, the people who have funding. And I also recognize like folks are saying, you know, maybe we're not looking for that type of validation essentially. And I think that's a conversation to be had about the Oscars, like major award shows. Like, is this even what we're striving for at this point? Do we want to be recognized by these industries that don't appreciate us? I think that's a whole separate conversation, but like at the end of the day, you do need money to make art. And so we're just looking for someone to basically fund all of the gorgeous content that's already out there.
The crazy thing is how much we dominate in all these content spaces, right? Like, you know, statistically, Latinos dominate on mobile consumption, internet consumption of media,
Movie
obviously the
ticket
box
sales.
office,
Movie ticket sales.
movie ticket sales,
Yeah.
all of it. So it's like, really, you know what I mean? And that to me is like that's a disheartening thing, you know. So.
Yeah, I would just add, because she teaches here at Columbia, a close friend of mine, Frances Negron, has written a lot on this topic, and she teaches here at Columbia. And she worked on a recent study that really looks at the Latino role in America. And it's something like 1.3% of Latin roles, or as you said, the villain, the bad character, the person that is thieving or robbing. And the other thing that some of her research has really discovered is that when you look at the pipeline, there is enough pipeline that we can flood the market in ways that would be fascinating in terms of giving up opportunity where it's deserved. The last thing is about ticket sales. She talks very clearly, if you look at the Fast and Furious, series, Latinos by and far indexed about 26% of the ticket sales of a series like that, meaning that they would go to the movies once, they would watch it on pay-per-view with their family, they'd go back and they'd bring their entire family to see stuff. So if we are bringing to the market that level of investment, we should have representation that equally matches that. But anyway, you should check out Frances Negron online, and you'll see her papers and her research. It's pretty impressive.
So we talked a little bit about some of the problems facing creators trying to come up through the pipeline, getting stuck here and there and everywhere. Now I'm curious, in a sort of ideal situation, you have the ears of an executive at the studio, or you have an audience in front of a really big funder, or the head of programming at a huge festival. Pick one, and what would you tell them to fix today, right now? We'll give a little bit of time to think about it, because it is a dream scenario. But actually, I want to start looking at the solutions of what we can do going forward, because I feel like these conversations have been happening for so long, and I would love to see it progress. And maybe we need to do like an itemized step 1 here, step 2 here, step 3 here. So let's start with maybe a possible step 1 with Laura.
I feel like I don't want to say that quantity is better than quality, but I will always believe in quality art. But I think that we cannot rely on these like heavily marketed one-stop shop for a specific culture. Like I don't know. There's so many movies out right now. Like we have In the Heights, we have Vivo, Encanto, West Side Story, that focus on like this one specific culture that each country or each culture has been waiting like so long for their turn, basically. And then everyone who is a descendant of that, whatever, like if you're Puerto Rican, you're like, this is the end all, like people perceive it as the end all be all of that community and like that storytelling. And I know the money is out there, like based on what Netflix is doing. Like there are so many shows that have been on Netflix that I every day I look, there's more, they're different, and they're predominantly white. And I'm like, we basically just need quantity at this point. Like, how are we supposed to be telling the story of Colombia if we only have this one piece in Narcos and that's it? Like, so for me, obviously it's a dream, but I'm just asking for more of everything.
The sad part is you may not see this moment happen again for quite a while. These two films shot simultaneously. If you live in Washington Heights, literally West Side Story and In the Heights were shooting blocks from each other. And they hired so many Latinos, hundreds. You know what I mean? If you were not hired, something was wrong with you. It was kind of like that. But the unfortunate thing is the heat that it got, to your point, and the fact that, the thing that makes me nervous is I don't know if we're going to see a moment like this happen again when you have two big films, studio films, musicals at that, starring Latinos. When is that going to happen again? I don't know. So the pressure is, well, this is all we've got. We've waited this long. When's the next time you see Dominicans and Puerto Ricans like this? And so that's where, unfortunately, the pressure lies for Lynn or, even for Spielberg or whatever. The irony, both of these films made the same amount of money. and that less than 50 mil. They both clocked in at like 45 mil. So that's the unfortunate thing. I think that there's that. But to your point, yeah, like how can these films not be the end all be all? I think the other thing is money, marketing money. Also, you know, some of these films are undermarketed. And I think really working with the community, like I hate to say, even for a festival like ours, I push every year, I knock on every studio door harder than I ought to be. And so that's the problem. You know, why am I begging? I told that to one studio, why am I here? Why am I begging you for money? When we're doing the work, right? I'm pretty sure Cynthia walks the walk because she's been in this game longer than even me. And literally, when I've asked her for advice, when we started coming up, you know, when she says holding the door, like you've done just that, you know, and there needs to be more of us. You know, the problem is that every Latino that's working in the studio, they're trying to protect their own keep. And they don't have any leverage, but they're like, whatever I could do, I'm trying to do it, and that's it. You know, I wish I could help you, but this is all I got. So that's the thing is that
I call that the curse of the token,
yeah,
where it's like the one person who gets through and then they believe that they're the only one that can be in that room.
yeah. And I've heard it. I've been to LA. You see it time and time again. Some of these people, unfortunately, you know, I've been elite panelists, you see it, and then it's like, well, what happened? What leverage you got? So I think that there's that, you know, there's a bunch of things, but getting us up there, getting the studios to invest in us, all of that, invest. And, you know, it's crazy how, again, to your point, you know, Cynthia, is like, they don't invest in a bunch of other crap and they'll keep investing in a bunch of other crap. But like with us, we're still, I don't get it. I'm still begging.
Miata, and then you.
I guess two things. As a storyteller, I find often that there's a lot of fear around Latino stories. We're a lot of people. We encompass a lot of the world. So there is a common narrative in North America that does revolve around a very specific narrative around Latina people. So there's a lot of fear because there's a lot of complexity in our culture, not only in that we're not just Mexican or Caribbean or South American or whatever, or you know, we're not just from one place, but we have all this deep, complex history. We have a colorism. We have all these narratives that are just a lot of layers, and I think that there's a lot of confusion in the eyes of like white American, you know, production head that I'm presenting a project to. They're like, wait, what are all these layers? And so there's a lot of fear because there's a lot of ignorance as to like the history of us, of our people, of where we come from. And there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of fear to learn, and there's a lot of fear to understand. And then when you start getting into women and Latina women or queer Latina women, then it's like, it just starts getting really scary. And then the other thing is the question I have is like, are you interested in telling new stories? Are you interested in new pathways for storytelling? Or are you interested in familiarity, in staying in the cycles, and in just investing in that cycle and things that are less risky? And if that's the case, okay, this is not the space for storytellers then, for actual storytellers looking for new pathways to the heroine that you're talking about. She is evolving, she's expanding every day. Her story is new every day. You know, where we are right now in storytelling is so exciting. And when I see the work of the people in my community, I get so inspired. And there is a bunch of us existing in abundance, right? A lot of us artists are existing in this space of abundance. I think a lot of, you know, what has to happen is the trauma of having to rip open the door in spaces that don't want you there. There's so much trauma that comes with that as an immigrant first, and then again as an artist trying to do that you tend to be holding everything really close, that we were talking about the token. But I think we're coming into a space of artists and storytellers that exist in abundance, that are opening the door for everybody, that are really excited to to share, because we become vessels. We're allowing ourselves to become vessels. We're allowing the stories to come through us, right? And we can be a facilitator for that story, mediator for that story. And I think there's a lot of fear around that way of telling stories. There's a lot of fear about that way of running a set. I find that my set is a collaboration. It's so wonderful to create in community. And I think that the hierarchies are so aggressively set in Hollywood that even if you talk about, oh, we're going to take a second because we're all going to talk about what happens when a baby is born, what happens to the body. And I'm going to involve Sam, the white guy over there. Like, you're going to tell me what happens when a baby comes through and what is your experience with that? And we're just going to have a conversation, everybody in the room. And that is a very scary thing. You know, if you're talking about new leadership, you have to talk about changing the entire structure. It's not just about fitting this story into something that already exists. It's about, no, everything has to transform now. And that's really scary for a studio head, you know, to have like a different kind of a way of leading a group. And so it's the dismantling of everything. And so I think that that's part of it. I think that that's the fear. So my question would be to the person sitting in the room with all the power, I'd be like, what are you actually invested in? Are you invested in new stories? Are you invested in the healing of our communities, in the transformation, in the power of storytelling and how we can transform and bring people together, you know, and reveal wounds and heal wounds? Or are you interested in safety and money? Because that's my only question. That's it, yeah.
And I think we know that some studios would prefer one way over the other. But I do want to hear from Cynthia and kind of give you the last word.
I just keep on thinking again, when you talk about dismantling the current structure, or thinking about, do we want to preserve what we have, or do we want to change what we can be? You know, I have to say, I come from a mom who always used to tell me, you know, you could be whatever you want to be. She used to say to me, very unlike the story we just heard. And, you know, when I think of the United States and I think of, there's more than enough money to deal with various issues, homelessness, housing, et cetera. And even the media problem that we have. You know, when I was commissioner, I always used to talk about this. There are mergers that happen, media mergers, that are millions and millions of dollars. Excuse me, if we taxed one media merger a year and made sure that a percentage of that money went into a fund that could fund festivals, that could fund new, I just need a little water, new, or the soda that's in the bag, Ariel. Sorry, it's a little cold. If we taxed, if you will, one media merger a year, thank you, sorry, we would have enough money to invest in new projects, in festivals. Imagine a media merger of $400 million and 0.1% went into an investment fund to invest in new projects, and that we had a slate of film festivals, not Sundance, Tribeca, the festivals that are serving our communities for the last 20 years. We would have a solution that's an economic solution that could invest in a variety of content, not just one type of content. So when I think about what's possible in the morning, all week long, when I'm working, I'm trying to think of bigger solutions, because there is big money in this country. We have big problems. Thank you. But we have also big opportunities. So that's what when I think about what it is, the challenge that I face every day at NIWIFT and also in my creative life, I just keep on thinking we have to be able to crack the nut of investment equals diversity, equals representation of community, equals change. The only way we are going to be able to have a media that's reflective of our society is to ensure that the people who produce, direct, and write are different than the ones that are doing it now.
Amen, bro.
Ooh. And what a note to end on. Like Calixto said earlier on, this is a whole dinner conversation. I'm sure all of us would love to get back together again and talk more about this issue. Maybe there'll be a sequel. Can I have another round of applause for these amazing panelists? Once again, thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the Athena Film Festival and stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you.